Good morning. Today is Monday, January 22nd, 2024. I imagine most, if not all of us, have had the experience of being affected by a workers' strike, a union action, and the reaction that we have to that depends on what's at stake for us. It's happened that, for example, people traveling back from Israel to the United States have been affected when all the workers at the airport in Israel go on strike. That's happened a number of times. It almost happened to us once. Probably our response to it varies depending on our opinion of the role of labor unions, of the right to strike. I mentioned this briefly last week, that there is a strong history in Jewish law of protecting the rights of workers. And this includes the right to form unions, labor unions, which means the right to form a group where the majority of members can pass rules that are binding even on the minority of the members, on all the members. And also, Jewish law has within it, in certain cases, the right to strike. Now, obviously, there needs to be a balance between the rights of workers and the rights of employers and the rights of the public. The Talmud records 2 worker strikes, both related to an essential service, and both stories kind of similar. One concerns a family named Garmu, the Garmu family. And this Garmu family had a monopoly. They were the ones who baked the lechem hapanim, the loaves of bread, the 12 loaves of bread that were placed on the mizbeach, on the altar. They were placed there every Friday. And every Friday, the old ones were taken off and the new ones were put on. And during the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, this is the time that I'm talking about, and the shape was very hard to make. And only this family of bakers knew how to do it. And they refused to teach anybody else outside of their own family the secrets of how to be able to bake this bread properly, because they had a monopoly and they could charge whatever they want because their product was needed. It was an essential service. It was necessary every Friday in the Beit HaMikdash, in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. So the Kohanim and the others who were in charge of running the temple did not like this situation. They did not like the fact that they had to rely on only one supplier, which means, of course, that one supplier could claim whatever price they want. And they insisted that this family teach the secret to some other people so that it would not only be one supplier. And Bnei Garmu, the Garmu family, went on strike. They went on strike. But Friday's coming, and you have to have those 12 loaves. So those who ran the temple turned to bakers in Alexandria, in Egypt. They brought in scabs. And these workers were able to bake the bread, but they were not able to bake the bread to the same level of quality that the Beis HaMikdash was used to. And of course, for the Beis HaMikdash, you want the highest quality. So the Kohanim, the priests, went back to the family of Garmu. And they said, okay, fine, you can keep the monopoly, but we need you to start baking again. And the family refused. And they said, we're only coming back to work if you double our pay. Well, it was an essential service. They would not budge. And the Kohanim agreed, and they doubled their pay. And the rabbis said about them some very, very not nice things because it was an essential service and because the rabbis believed that the only reason they did it was to make more money, and it was not right. So they were criticized. There's another story in the same passage of the Talmud about a family of Avtinas, the Avtinas family. And they had the monopoly on making the ketores, the incense. So every day incense were offered in the Beis HaMikdash. It was a number of different spices that were added together. It had to be very precise, and it required great expertise in order to make it. And this Avtinas family was the only family that knew how to make this ketores, the mixture of the incense. And they refused to teach anyone else how to do it. So the rabbis tried the same thing. They tried to bring in experts from Alexandria, from Egypt, who were able to recreate the mixture, but they were not able to recreate it in a way that the smoke would rise in a thin line, which is the way that the Avtinas family had done it. And so again, it wasn't the same level of quality. So same thing, the Chachamim tried to bring in cheaper workers, but they couldn't do the work to the same level of quality. And once they could not find the same level of quality, they went back to the Avtinas family. The Avtinas family refused. And they refused to come back. And then the Talmud says they too had to double their salary before they would come back. So the Talmud explains in both of these cases, the families that refused had what they claim was a legitimate reason for doing it. They had a tradition in their family that one day the Beis HaMikdash would be destroyed. And if there were others that shared the secret, that there might be unscrupulous people who would be making these products even after the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed for other purposes, which was prohibited. And they felt that they were the only worthy overseers of how to make this product. And they felt that they were actually guarding the sanctity of the temple by not sharing it with anybody. The Chachamim, the rabbis, thought that was just an excuse, and they thought that they were doing it to get more money, and they were very, very critical of that. So what you see from here is that according to Jewish law, in general, it is not permitted to strike in an essential service, especially when the strike primarily hurts a third party that is not involved in the dispute between the employer and the employees. And there must be a system of binding arbitration to decide what is essential, what is not, and to settle labor disputes in those areas of essential services if we're not going to allow strikes. Also, it's prohibited according to Jewish law for workers or employees to do anything illegal during a labor dispute. Physical violence, obviously, crimes against property, sabotage, all of those things are prohibited. According to Rabbi Avraham Kook, first chief rabbi of Israel, he was a strong supporter of labor unions. And he permitted labor unions to call a strike in order to force an employer to abide by a contract if they were not doing so, or to provide safe working conditions if they were not doing so, But in general, he did not support a strike simply to increase wages or to change job requirements. That type of a dispute, according to Rav Kook, could only be adjudicated in arbitration, not through striking. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein was also faced with this question, and in general he ruled that yes, under certain circumstances, it is permissible to strike. He dealt with what is perhaps the most difficult example of this. Is it ever possible for Jewish studies teachers to go on strike to increase their pay? And of course, to withhold teaching Torah is something that is very, very difficult to allow. And Rabbi Feinstein was extremely hesitant to ever allow that, but to rely on negotiation. But even there, in an extreme case where it was clear that the teachers were not being treated properly, and there was no other way to get it done, Rav Moshe, again, in extreme cases, allowed for striking. Rabbi Yosef Rimon approached this topic, and he points out that, first of all, when it comes to labor relations in general, we follow Dina de Malchusa, the law of the land. So if we live in a country that allows strikes, then according to Jewish law, workers are allowed to make use of that. Same thing with unions. When it comes to certain groups that are providing an essential service, so the first thing is it's necessary to determine, is it actually an essential service? An issue that has come up a number of times in Israel, and it's also come up here, is a strike by doctors or nurses. Now, on the surface, of course, it would seem this is an essential service that perhaps we should never allow a labor strike. However, number one, often when there is a labor strike by medical professionals, excluded from that work stoppage are emergency workers, first aid workers, those physicians, nurses who are doing things literally to save people's lives immediately, and it is other things that are put off. So it depends on the circumstances as to whether such a thing would be permitted. But as a general manner, a general approach, the right to strike is based on what we discussed last week, that every single person has an inherent right to decide what to do and what not to do with their time. A person has the right to say, I'm not going to do that. It is part of a human being's right. And also, especially if the strike is over poor working conditions, well, if the poor working conditions are to continue, it may discourage others from entering the field. If that is in an important field, let's say like medicine, well, that is a societal need, not just to be able to have doctors and nurses today, but to be able to have doctors and nurses in the future. So that means that the working conditions have to be okay in order to make sure that people are entering that field. So there is a short-term view, and then there's also a wider vision, long-term view of what is best for society. So what we see from these sources is that there is nuance, and it requires objective outside authorities to decide in each given action if a certain work stoppage or work action is legitimate. But fundamentally, the right to strike or to withhold labor under certain circumstances starts with what we discussed last week in the release of the Jewish people from slavery in Egypt. And when the Torah says, Avadaihem, God says to us, you are my servants. V'lo avodim lavodim. You are not servants to other of my servants, God says. You're my servants, but you're not servants to another person. We are not subservient to any other person, to any of God's other servants. So, if we agree to do something, in general we have to do it, but there may be circumstances in which we can say, I'm not a servant, and I don't have to be treated like a servant, because you and I are both servants of God. My friends, I wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.